like to welcome today Mark O'Brien. Mark is somebody that I met, I think about 7-8 years ago, and we were looking at a project which Mark is still involved in, called The Journey Home. And I'm sure Mark will talk a little bit about The Journey Home, but Mark is an artist and an activist, political commentator, journalist, commentator of all sorts, really. So, Mark, I wonder if you could actually just talk a little bit about yourself and then just launch into your passion, stuff that you want to talk about. And I'll be sure to be asking you a few things as we go along.
Thank you, Neil. It's great to see you. It's wonderful to reconnect. I think the easiest way for me to start about who Mark O'Brien is that the journey that I began when I was born into this world was an unconventional journey. It was a journey that I was going to consciously refuse to follow the norms of society. Now, I'm not an anarchist, but I remember at a very early age being told, well, this is what you have to do. And that is, you're going to get married, you're going to have a picket fence, you're going to have a cat and a dog and 3 or 4 kids or whatever. Being an Irish, you're going to have 6 or 8 kids. And there was something about inside of me that just didn't ring true. And so I went to parochial school up until the first 2 years of college in the United States. And I was constantly inundated with the Catholic faith, much of which I subscribe to. I mean, the work of Jesus Christ talking about reaching out to the poor is beautiful tenets. But the church dictating how you're supposed to believe was something that I resented. And so subconsciously, probably, I revolted and lived my life in somewhat of a revolution of not wanting to be like everyone else. And so that path, although I went into commercial television and commercial radio, it eventually led me to use my ability to see things. You know, you were saying I was an artist. An artist looks at life, and then they try to interpret that with a camera. And since I was in audio and video, I used the camera to tell the story of the human story. And because I felt that I wasn't part of the mainstream, it gave me the ability to really hone in on people in need who were not part of the mainstream, the poor, the disenfranchised. And I was able to tell their story and elevate them to a position to allow their own human dignity to shine through. And I think I was able to use the camera and the art to be able to better understand and tell that story simply because I reached out to them. I didn't want to become part of the mainstream. I wanted to reach out to the people who the mainstream doesn't look at. Okay. And so that journey led me working for almost 20 years for a major nonprofit human rights organization for older people. And we advocated for some very serious policies in the United States: nursing home reform, long-term care, euthanasia, right to die, and so on and so forth. And that enabled me to really hone in on what we need to do as a country, as a world, for each other, for ourselves first, and for everyone, because we're all part of this together. We're all part of the gig. And so that path, once I had an unfortunate experience with this nonprofit, because it was one of those things where the nonprofit was going through becoming a corporation. They were buying into that whole new philosophy that corporations were adopting at the turn of the century. And so this wonderful nonprofit, the second largest in the world next to the Catholic Church, started to become a corporation, when in fact they were there to help elderly, to advocate for the elderly. And because there were conflicts, and I resented the fact, and I refused to change my job description to fit into this new model that they had. And so we parted ways, but I continued to pursue the human rights in different areas, predominantly in the Native American community in the United States. But again, I think it all starts, Neil, back from when I was born. And I just didn't sound right about this, being told what to do.
Fair enough. So tell us a little bit more about the work that's gone on with the Native American community. It's something which is extremely interesting. So, you know, where's that drawn you?
Well, it started a number of years ago. I did a documentary. I spent a week on Navajo Nation, which is the largest Indian tribe in the United States. And the Navajo Nation is, because of treaties with the Indians, they have their own government. They are United States citizens, but they also have a government. And their government is, in my opinion, as corrupt as the federal government here in the United States. You know,
right.
you get, you know, you have people in power, they abuse the power, the money that comes from the people, it goes into the pockets of those in the government. But what really attracted me to the Native Americans, so you see this adverse poverty all over the Indian tribes, especially Navajo Nation. And it's very, very remote. I mean, your hospital might be 60, 70, 80 miles away, and it's very mountainous, or it could be very flat and dry like a desert. It's very huge. It's a huge piece of land. And in working with them, I realized that these people believe, to them, land, this gets into the environmental thing. This is how I segue from human rights into environment. Because Native Americans, many of them, and their old wisdom is about respecting Mother Earth. They subsist. They live on the earth. They are part of the earth. And they realized very early on that we cannot dominate Earth. We have to become a partner with Earth. There has to be a balance. Not only internal balance, but in balance with all those animals and creatures around you. And that really struck a chord in me. And I started to do deep research into the history of Native Americans in America that we are never taught in American schools. And it's horrifying. It's horrifying what we did. We have a really ugly history with African Americans in this country, bringing slaves over, building up the South and the economy on the backs of slaves. But what we did to the Indians was actually come to their land, force them to literally walk off their land and go hundreds and hundreds of miles to settle on these reservations, which they will call internment camps. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's human rights led me to the Indians, which led me to the earth and to the understanding of the environment.
Tell me, what are the lessons that you're picking up from the Navajo people in terms of actually how you can go about, reconnecting to the earth? So, you're talking about that. So subsistence is a word which is so coloured, in our language, and yet the feeling that I get talking to you is that you're talking about something deeply spiritual where you actually reconnect. So, what are the lessons that are available to white folks, Westerners, so-called?
Well, it's funny. Just before we went on air, I blessed myself with a smudge stick, which is a Native American ritual, just to cleanse yourself. And that's what I did before this. So it is very spiritual. So what I have done to maintain my balance is, when the season allows, I grow my own organic garden. And that whole nurturing seeds into fruits and vegetables makes you connected to the earth. You are a part of life itself. Mm-hmm. And that's the first lesson that I know. And especially now when there's concerns, I don't know if in Australia, but here in the United States, about our food supply. In a couple of months, I'm going to have some beautiful fruits and vegetables. And I'm going to take the smudge stick and smudge myself. That's the first lesson I know. The other thing is that I learned this years ago when I first became connected to indigenous people. I lived in Alaska. I drove across country, started my television career in Alaska. And the first time I went camping to Denali, it was the longest day of the year, the summer solstice. And I went to bed, and the cloud covering is always very thick around Denali. The next morning, the sunrise is quite early because the sun doesn't set. Mm. And right in front of as I step out of my tent, there's this magnificent Denali, the Great One, Mount McKinley, this absolutely stunning mountain. And at that moment, I had a religious experience. I could feel the chills going through me. This was coming from nature. That in the distance, you could see the sandy colored grizzly bear. So I knew that I was what it did to me, Neil, I realized right then and there that humans, we are tiny. We don't matter. We are not the big, dominant, and powerful people. We are just one little speck, one part of a huge web that unites us all together. And with that, you get almost a relief, knowing that, you know what? I have the power to connect. I have a power to commune with things around me. I don't have to take control of that. If this is the land that is owned by the bears, if I happen to walk on a path and they warn me that bears are there, I have to take precautions. Not a gun, but I got to tin cans and make noise because I'm walking on their property. I am a visitor to their land. That's the first thing that I realized. I'm just a visitor, a visitor, and also I ain't as important as I think I am. I'm a part of the earth.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about the, the supply chain of food and all that sort of thing here in Australia. We actually export, well, we did up until a couple of months ago. We export, I think it's 2/3 of the food that we grow. So there's so much food here. It's absolutely inconceivable that we could run out of food. Wonderful growing conditions. And admittedly, a lot of the land mass of Australia is desert. But which is difficult to grow things on, but there's enough opportunity to grow food here. But I do the same thing as you. I have a garden, and I, probably a little bit like you, I've been lessening my footprint over the years so that I have a smaller and smaller and smaller footprint, so that I can integrate better and better with the, with the community and with, like the community being the environment. So tell us a little bit about the, I can feel it, you're talking about the bears and the need to actually acknowledge the fact that this is their territory, you're now, embarking in amongst them. And I would draw a parallel to how I feel about microbes and this virus, the coronavirus that's going around, is that I'm aware of its territory. And, so if I'm in its territory, then I would take care. That would be an approach that I would take at that sort of microbial level as well. So it's very interesting to hear you talk about, the land of the bears, this bear territory. But tell us a little bit more about what you're observing. You're in Washington, D.C., and, you're right in amongst the thick of what's happening, with human interaction with the environment. Tell us what you're actually seeing there, and what it's leading you to do.
Well, what I'm seeing makes me want to go like this. It is an ugly scene happening here in DC. It is so divisive. Our country is so divisive. Capitol Hill, that way, is 6 miles. And we're almost in the shadow of Capitol Hill. And yet those people are so divided. They are tearing this country apart with, not they in particular, but everything is being separated. We're losing our balance. We're losing our connection. Well, we've lost pretty much our connection to the earth. So for instance, during this terrible coronavirus that is impacting everyone, there were people 3 days ago that protested in 3 major cities, demanding that we reopen everything. They didn't practice social distancing. They weren't wearing masks. They were wearing their guns, and they were demanding that we open up. So they weren't even respecting the virus. They were walking into the virus and saying, I'm into this. Nothing going to happen to me because I got my gun. And this kind of attitude is permeating the United States. At least half of, or pretty close to half of the United States is like that. So what I'm saying is that fortunately, we have very strong governors in this region, and the governors are stepping to the plate, and they're holding things back. They're asking people to wear masks, to stay at home, to respect the world of the coronavirus. Respect the bears. If you're going to go out there, if you want to go out there and not wear a mask, you may get the disease and you may die. But you'll surely suffer for at least 2 weeks, apparently, suffer very badly. So that's the first thing that I'm seeing is that people, now why are we acting like this? I believe we're acting like this. Why is support so important to get the economy back? Yes, we do need to get the economy back, but it's really scratching away at the biggest problem that we have, and that is economic inequality and economic injustice. The 1% that Senator Bernie Sanders talks about is so very true. These corporations, whenever they get tax breaks, they don't funnel it back into their employees. They put them into stock buyouts and raises for everybody. The economic injustice and inequality that the coronavirus is showing is really bringing all of this into perspective. It truly is. And so while you have people who are beginning to slowly wake up and see that, you still have the other side who were strapped around with their guns, refusing to wear masks. So it's pretty chaotic. But again, it goes back to people have to take responsibility for themselves. They have to educate themselves, and they have to know if you're going to go into the land of coronavirus, you're going to get the disease.
Okay, well, that's a great way of actually observing it, and it's about respecting nature and the fact that bears have lots of muscles and strong claws, and they could bite you as well. So tell me a little bit about this inequality and the what you're seeing there. I find it fascinating. There are many people who are saying, we have to stop all this lockdown, and it's a complete lie and all that type of thing. So, and I respect their right to actually hold those views. It's really important that people can actually say, well, we've been lied to. We've been lied to about the, the disease statistics and indeed the whole modelling, the disease modelling. So, that needs to be heard. And what we're seeing, of course, is that nobody's getting an opportunity to actually say those things. Facebook shutting people down and, for asking these sorts of questions. So on one hand, you've got, what I would consider to be people who are pretty misled out there with their guns and saying we're not going to be attacked by a virus because we're carrying our guns, we're strong and tough and all that kind of stuff. So, dare I say, it's a very misled structuring, like sort of mental structuring around the situation. But equally, there's, the panic and the blame and the guilt and everything else that goes with people who are, they're going crazy. So they're in an anxiety attack, and so they need to go and walk out on the street, and everybody's attacking and vilifying them. Somewhere in here, like we've got a mass consciousness, and I'd just like you to just have a look at it from your perspective, from your viewpoint, so the artist's eyes, what you're seeing around that. In a little bit more direction. Okay, so you're in Washington D.C. What you're seeing with people? So this is a city which is like no other city on the planet. Yeah. Its whole focus is about trying to get the interests of a very small group of people, prosecuted out, and different groups, different small groups are there doing that. So you would say that it's a group. It's a city where there are strongly held views. Yeah. And how well directed they are is one question. Another question is, how does that impact actually on how they behave?
Okay, got you. Washington, D.C. and this whole region, what we call the DMV, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, is predominantly government workers, federal government workers, and federal government contractors. Okay, I was once served as a contractor for various agencies. So you have people who will always have a job. They have good paying jobs. They have good health insurance. They have good pensions. Okay. The other part of this government, then you have a huge service industry. And what you see is, especially with the service industry, all the restaurants, and we have a lot of restaurants, a lot of very good restaurants in this area have had to shut down. They may be open for a few hours and have grab and go carry out, but for the most part, you can't go in and can't get a drink, can't get a meal. Well, you have hundreds, millions of service industry people who work here in DC. they rely, because they don't get an hourly wage, we don't have a guaranteed $15 minimum wage. So they rely on tips. Well, if you don't have customers, you don't have tips. If you don't have tips, you don't have money to pay your rent. And this is exposing, especially in this one area, how bad economic inequality is. Because these people literally cannot afford. They cannot afford their rent, so they've gone on unemployment. But that will run out after a certain amount of time. So the people who, the haves, let's say the haves, the federal government people, are happy. They've got their jobs. They're not concerned about it. And as they're continuing to push their own agenda, they rarely take a look over at the restaurant workers or the retail workers, the people who support the economy with which they live in. And that's the worst part of what's happening now. And on both sides, the Republican Democrats, when they're now working on another stimulus bill for small businesses. But with every bill, there's always going to be a rider slipped in. So somebody's going to, I'll simplify it. Politician A got to help this lobbyist that helps him. All right, well, I got to slip this in a rider into this stimulus bill. So it's not all going to the small businesses and the people, it's going to some of my special interests. That's the kind of stuff you see here in Washington. It's phony, it's disgraceful, and it's politics.
Is that pattern sort of played out across the United States, in your opinion? Like, are you seeing that everywhere? So, like, this inequality in the economies, so that the fact that people just don't have access to wealth, is that really playing out with this virus?
Oh, yes. I don't know the statistics, but they're pretty shocking when you see how much wealth is controlled by the 1%. We have lost here in the United States a middle class. You have the super rich, and you have the people below what used to be the middle class. And yeah, it does play out everywhere because there's so much money controlled by a few.
Those people that were in the middle class who are well educated, and with strong cultural sort of standpoints and so on and so forth, where are they going in this?
I think that's a hard question to say. Where are they going with this? If they have a job, they're lucky. And still, a lot of people have their jobs. But the people in the middle class who lost their jobs or on furloughs are realizing that the American dream was sort of bullshit. That what we grew up to believe about democracy and capitalism is not true. We have become a capitalistic society, and we have become so capitalistic that greed outweighs people. So, for instance, in making their decisions to open the government, many Republican, in particular, politicians are weighing. They say the disease is bad, but the cure can't be as bad as the disease. In other words, they're willing to, okay, let's open up the economy. If you get the disease, well, it's better to have the economy going than worrying about you. We have lost touch with the fact that we are supposed to be a caring nation of people. Greed has taken it over, in my opinion.
So if you look at the middle class that was surviving, and you're talking about the middle class that have got a job, there's also the middle class who own the restaurants. So they own the small businesses, the corner stores and that type of thing. And of course, all of their business is completely being slaughtered by what's going on. And probably, progressively over the last 20 years or more, there's been a trend for those people, for their wealth to actually be diminished, escalating rents for their properties and, whatever else is going on. But you've got this pool of highly educated thinking people who are facing a real decline, and it's would have to be chartable. What's going through their heads? What's going through these people's heads?
Well, funny you say that. I have a good friend who owns a very nice Irish bar in Arlington called the Celtic House. And I was just talking to him the other day. It is the most popular Irish bar in Virginia. Business is great. At St. Patrick's Day, all of it shut down. So he did open up carry out. And he had a staff of 25 people, and he didn't release them, but he had to stagger schedules. So some people are working 2 days a week for about 8 hours in total. He's paying them a nominal fee, and then hopefully when people pick up food, they'll tip them. Well, he was saying that he's very, very concerned. He got support with the first small business loan, the stimulus package. But he is fearful that if this continues, he will lose the entire bar. He will lose his dream, and he will probably have to go back to Ireland. And this is weighing in the back of his head. This is impacting his entire psyche. You know, he's a very lovely man, but you can tell that this is just eating away at him, this stress. And it concerns me because he's a big guy, and the stress could lead to a heart attack.
Sure.
And this is one example of somebody who's going through a very difficult time.
So where does this go? Like, where do people like your friend, the bar owner, how do they turn? Like, what direction do they take, and what guidance would you have for people who are actually starting to realize that this great American dream is all falling apart for them?
Yeah, I think the most powerful weapon that we have as Americans, and Americans don't understand it, is the vote. The vote. People have to get out. When we had primaries, they have to get out and vote. We have to find leaders who will address the concerns that we all have. And in absence of that, we're going to continue to have a government that doesn't care about anyone but their corporations. And remember, the Supreme Court issued that corporations are people. So Americans have to stand up and vote. That's the most important thing. And we have a big presidential vote coming up in November. People have to vote. That's the first thing. The other thing, I can't give advice because we don't know what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen.
You can't have
meditate or drink or, it's very uncertain.
Yeah, no, you actually have given advice there, because what you're talking about is that recognize that I've got a choice. First of all, is recognize I've got a choice, and B, take the blinkers off. Actually see what's going on and understand what's actually happening. So recognize the the powers of decline that are occurring. That as that 1% gets richer and richer and richer, and there's only one place they're nicking it from. They're nicking it because they've already exploited the poor people to the point where there's no more money there. The only place where they've been able to get money from is the middle class. So steadily the 1% have been stealing money off the middle class, and the middle class are the ones who are highly educated, actually organized people around them. So like in terms of, small blocks of people, they're the closest thing to an organizational structure for all of their staff. Where does it work? Like this whole business of choice and being informed and then going ahead and actually taking action, or even just getting to a point where I understand the situation. I don't know. This is what I'm hearing from you anyway. I'm hearing, between the lines a little bit here.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise in our society, and there's so much noise that it deafens people. And when they get home at nighttime, they want to medicate, or they want to turn on the TV and just watch nonsense, and they don't want to think about it. As long as their 401k is doing okay and they still have a job, okay, we can deal with that. And so they don't do their civic duty. They don't educate themselves. They don't vote. They don't coalesce into like-minded groups and exert power as a intellectual group. We're lazy. We've drank the Kool-Aid. And now with this disease, if in fact this disease became really serious, like the pandemic in the 1900s, people would die on the streets. There would be major change. But I think we are at a point where we have the opportunity to have major change now. We have to look at all of these problems that we have. We have to reevaluate the systems that are in place. We have to reevaluate our government. We have to reevaluate our own lives. You know, we can't expect everyone to spoon feed us. We have to be responsible for ourselves and educate ourselves. Don't take everything at face value. Make up your own mind. And I'm afraid that we haven't done that enough in this country, in my observation.
Okay, well, big message here from MarkO'Brien is, you know, wake up, educate yourself, stop self-medicating, and actually form communities. So go about forming communities. You know, you're welcome to talk further on you know, any of that topic, but if you feel as though you've sort of explored all that area as much as you'd like to, or feel comfortable to do so, you know, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Journey Home and you know, these other projects that you've got on the go. So these artistic projects that you're running, or environmental projects as you describe them.
Well, Journey Home is a big one, as you know. And we have a character who was a chieftain back in the 1800s in what is called now North Dakota. And he was a warrior at the time that the white man was coming out west. Now, these folks already were nomadic people who lived in the West, and they had never seen white people before, and the white people come. So his story is as a chief living in balance with the earth, hearing these rumblings that a white man's coming, going to the wise men, the medicine doctors, and hearing prophecies about what's going to happen. There's going to be disease. There's going to be a black snake that will cross the land. Well, the black snake first was the railroad, and now it's the oil pipelines. That's the world he lived in. He was murdered, but that's this backstory. The story is actually, he, as a spirit, many, many years later, he is a spirit who forms a crow and is given a mission to go back to present day, to ignite, to wake up his people, to wake up all people to the realities of what's going on. Because if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And this is the future with which he comes, from which he came from, is devastated. The ocean waves crack on Santa Monica, the downtown promenade in Santa Monica. In Denver, Colorado, cactus grow out of the streets. We've destroyed the land. It's gone. That's the scary part of it. So he has a chance to go back. And it's actually a story about he reconciling with his own past, which wasn't that pretty, but also to find a young girl, to wake her up so that she can raise the consciousness of people to live in balance with the earth. There's a great line that an advocate from one of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest says, and he says, you can't put a price on the sacred. Well, the earth to Native American cultures is sacred. It's probably the same with Aboriginals and Amazonians and so on and so forth. It's sacred. We live, the earth gives us, and we give back to the earth. And so the whole story is based on the fact that we're destroying the earth. And unless we realize that we are part of her, okay, and so we tell that allegory through the journey of Imanu, the character. And Imanu, I believe you came up with the name, or you encouraged us. We worked it all out, and it was a brilliant session we had. Now, back to Journey Home. We have the whole story, the whole deal about this was to get a buy-in from Native American community. We wanted the educators, the professors, we wanted the historians, we wanted the actors, the musicians, and so on and so forth. And this has been the hardest sell because, first of all, Hollywood or movies are about making big money. They don't want to hear something that is preachy, even though this isn't preachy, it's an action film. But they don't want to touch it. And then the other problem that we have is that being white people, we could be accused of cultural misappropriation or misappropriation. And there's resentment with that. So the big struggle has been to, first of all, get people to read the script and understand, hey, you know what? We are messing up this earth. And hey, yeah, we did have a bad history. Let's wake up. And now let's start on a new path. Let's all get together. And that path's very simple. We are doing it by growing our garden. We're bringing, you know, we already are doing that on simple terms. Or you said you're cutting your carbon footprint. You know, people, it's so easy. You don't have to drive your car as much as you do. Take mass transit or ride a bike. Mm-hmm. And that's the essence of Journey Home, is to show people it's not awful, but if we don't act, what you saw in the future will happen, according to scientists.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about that. So once again, you know, we're right back at this thing where we're trying to actually educate well-educated people. And then, you know, you've got the potential and the opportunity, and we would have to be aware of this potential within ourselves is to be right and to only hold one opinion and to hold the right opinion and so on. And, you know, you and I were talking before we started this interview about, you know, what I see as being one of the main issues, and it's separation. And separation stems from being right. Soon as you think you actually have the answer, then you're going to separate from other people. And that's why I was so interested in what you're observing in North America, you know, with this depletion of the resources of the middle class. Here's a perfect group of people who could choose to not self-medicate, could choose to actually wake up, could choose, and they have the resources. They have the education and the resources to look at these things. And yet, you know, your point is that they just want to turn on the telly. They want to find somebody who's got a strong opinion. Then they want to follow that strong opinion, whether it be left or right, doesn't matter. They just want somebody else to hold an opinion for them.
Yeah, you know, it seems to me that collectively speaking, generally speaking, there's a lack of self-awareness. Like you were saying, people want to be correct. They want to be correct at all costs. And to be self-aware, you realize, okay, I don't have all the answers. You know what? I'm not the perfect person I thought I was. And I think once you become self-aware, you have begun to take a step on the journey towards balance. Because I believe if you become self-aware, you realize, I can't allow this to happen, whatever it is. I cannot allow these oil companies to come in here and do what they're doing to the native tribes. And I also think people are afraid. They're afraid of being incorrect, so they don't speak. They call it the silent majority. Remember, we had the silent majority or silent minority, whatever they have. But people need to ask themselves, regardless of what their background is, what if I was all of a sudden put into a concentration camp, regardless of what my religion or my ethnicity is? What if I was put into a concentration camp? Would I just go along with it, hoping that I'm going to get out? Or would I try to get people together, form a group, and fight it? Now, that's probably not a valid, Auschwitz, I mean, the concentration camp is probably not valid. I'm going to take that back and say that I am part Jewish, but I didn't mean that in any negative way. But I'm just thinking that we are in a concentration camp of people telling you how to live. And not being able to, not be willing to break out of it. Were you and I talking about a union? Were we talking about unions? I had a conversation about unions recently. In any event, coming together and showing the power of one collectively, power of many, to break out of this and to change the course of the planet or the society.
Look, you raised a very interesting question, and this is a lot of other observers are actually very, very concerned about the dramatic legislative changes that are going on at the moment where, you know, unless you're vaccinated, you're not going to be able to travel and these types of things that are coming in. Is it just more symptoms of the same stuff, Mark, or is it something new? Is this a new wave of control?
I don't know if it's a new wave of. I think we've been doing that, at least in the United States, since 2001, or 2013, when they passed the Patriot Act, and that a lot of our personal liberties were taken away by the government. So I think this is just part of what's been going on. But there are a lot of theories out there. There are a lot of theories about the New World Order and all of these things. I'm not quite. I mean, I come from a family of scientists. My father was a doctor. My brother's a doctor. So I listen to science. When they tell me we've got this virus and you got to wear a mask, I wear a mask. I have no problem. If they say you need a vaccine, I have no problem with that. Because I respect scientists. That's what they do. So I don't see those things as necessarily nefarious. Because, I don't know.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Like, it's a justified cause, isn't it? So, like, do we have a justified cause to take action in the way that we are as a collective? And as we were just talking about before, there's no right answer to this question. That there's no answer, no right one.
If anything, Neil, I would see the opposite. I would see the government, for instance, right now pushing to open, is that they're willing to put the lives of humans at risk. And most importantly, the elderly, the expendable. Look, the super wealthy would love to have a society where you don't have the elderly who are taking Social Security and Medicare. They would love not to have the poor who are taking Medicaid. And so it would be in their greedy best interest to let the much of the population suffer and die. So I see, and if that be the case, then a vaccine would be a very positive thing, encouraging people to get a vaccine.
Sure. Well, it's wonderful to hear, somebody like yourself actually exploring that line of thinking. It's very encouraging to have their voice. It's very encouraging.
I got to tell you, it's not depressing. I mean, I just sit back there and it's like I observe and go, dumbass people. Not that I'm brilliant, but I'm self-aware. I know that I'm a dumbass person, but I'm not that dumb.
Cool. Well, Mark, I wonder if you've got any advice for people in terms of what they're doing. You've been talking about getting people to wake up and take responsibility for themselves. Are there other things that you would advise for people?
Yeah. Thank you. A plug. I have a radio station called, an internet radio station called the Celtic Salmon. And the Celtic Salmon is a 24/7 station. And it's music that I collected over the years. Since I first started collecting music, and then when I was professionally in radio. It's great music. Some of it is well known, some of it isn't. It's from all over the world. And my catchphrase is called the Celtic Salmon, music for your spirit. And I promote this as being music that will touch your heart, enhance your creativity. It'll put you in a good place. Now, I'm not asking you necessarily to put on headsets, although I recommend it, but to use it as a background as you're working or whatever you're doing about the day. Because at some point during that day, as you're listening, there's going to be a piece of music that's going to tap into your heart. And it's going to elevate you. So my first thing to do is to look to the arts as healing.
Okay. Yeah.
Whatever your art is. That's the first piece of advice. The other thing is what we were talking about. If you have a piece of property, dig it up, fertilize it, plant. Become part of the earth. Hold that dirt in your hand. Feel it. The Native Americans are like that, but also the Irish, of which I'm an Irish citizen, are very much connected to the land, the earth. that's a wonderful way to connect, to give you balance, I think. So music, planting are great ways. And of course, any kind of DIY project. I also have another business where I started this last year, the Book of Kells, the ancient medieval manuscript from Ireland. I take hand-blown glass Christmas ornaments that are made by a nonprofit in Palestine. And then I paint these intricate Book of Kells designs and sell those. To me, for me, painting something, and they're very intricate and they're very small, it is the most therapeutic thing that I can find, because you lose yourself. You become one with that which you're doing. And it frees your mind of any worries that you have. And the other thing is that the glass was blown by some poor person in the Holy Land, a Palestinian. Mm-hmm. And you feel their energy in that hand, in that ornament. You feel their energy in your hand. And that, I find that. So those things for me. Okay. So this whole thing of sheltering at home hasn't been that difficult for me, because I do all that stuff at home anyway. And then when we do get clean, the best thing is just walking in nature, is just being outside, listening to the birds, really listening. Like in the morning, I love the sounds of birds in Australia, but we have some pretty birds out here on the East Coast. And they start about 5 a.m. as dawn comes. And it's just brilliant music. And so I listen to that before I turn on anything else, before I even listen to my radio station, listen to the birds. It'll bring peace. It'll bring balance to us. We're part of that. They're singing for us.
Well, Mark, that's been a wonderful interview, and I love it that you've got these well attended opinions that you've got, but that you're also open to that recognition of holding the truth and what that means, and yet you're prepared to actually take action on stuff. So you've come to these understandings about the environment and so on and so forth, and you're prepared to take action. So all strength to your arm, my friend. And
I hope I helped you. Just so you know, personally, I do have one albatross. It's not really an albatross, but something that's kept me here in this environment, in this part of the world. And that is, I'm a caregiver to my mom. And my mom will be 103 in July. And it's funny, when we first started, we talked about a path. And my path led me when my mother in her 90s fell. And I thought, well, I'm in a transition period. I was going to go to New Orleans, but my mother needed me. She went to the hospital. And then I said, okay, well, I'll come and caregive for a few years. Well, a few years turned into more than a few years. Mm-hmm. And so the kinds of things that I really would like to do in terms of advocating, I can't do right now, because I have the first responsibility, and that is a job to ensure that my mother lives as healthy and happy a life as she can.
Sure.
And then once that.
Yeah, well, it's a grand old thing to be looking after, an adult parent,
I suppose, people say that, but sometimes it gets tough.
Yeah. I'm sure. Mark, look, good luck with your future, with all of your interests and your finding yourself, all these things that you're talking about.
I hope I was able to help you out in some way.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you have. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to me. It's great seeing you. Okay. And we're going to get Journey Home off the ground one day. And your name is on the script, on the front page. You're a co-writer. Oh, yeah, you are. Did you know that?
No.
It's MarkO'Brien, 𝗕𝗂𝗶𝘁, and you'll do it. Yep.
Thank you.
You're on it. Thank you, my friend.
Oh, thank you.
Be well. And good luck with the head thing. It's way too complex for me. I'm just a stupid little artist. I'm self-aware enough to know that. Thank you, Neil.